So, welcome back, speakers. What fantastic and very insightful presentations we've just heard. Thank you very much for all your contributions. We have a system where we have our audience also presenting us with questions. I myself have compiled a few. I wanted to kick off with a thought-provoking idea, and this was a statement that Karl Lagerfeld made many years ago, which was, "Fashion is about managing scarcity, not supply." And I wanted to connect that to a sentence that actually I took from Omoyemi's remarks, which were that in Africa, creativity is a community act. So if we kick off with that, creativity, what's the real meaning of creativity? What's the real meaning of fashion? Any comments in relation to how we see today fashion versus how we should see it in the future if we want to build a sustainable future? And how should we view creativity if we want to build a really creative solution to this dynamic problem that we have about which is a systematic problem around fashion today?
I think for us, just going back to that statement around creativity being a community act, just goes to the fact that we've always seen creativity as co-creation, as collaboration, and that's primarily because craftsmanship is the heartbeat of African fashion. So most of the designers, you find that it's a combination of working with people in different communities, either with human resources or natural resources, through skills that's been passed down from generation to generation. It's not something you can do on your own. You have to sit down with people. You have to be a part of the process. It's co-creation with either your weavers. It's co-creation with either the person who's hand embellishing or hand creating. So it's not a solo act. So we've always viewed it, it's always been important to view it as something you do, it's not created in a silo. So there's no way you're going to be a part of that kind of process that starts, that doesn't necessarily start with you, but starts with a conversation with other people. There's no way you can start with that you will not go back and investing in those kind of communities. There's no way you can be a part of that creative process that you will not ensure that some way, shape or form, you're supporting livelihoods, you're creating value from source to product. So yes to that approach to creativity, yes to co-creation as a solution for so many things that's happening within our ecosystem today, and yes to working together. I think.
So what do you think about a question from the audience is, can fashion ever be ethical and cheap, or is that self-explanatory?
I'd say the fact that something's cheap doesn't mean it doesn't cost much. It just means that someone other than you is paying the price.
No, it definitely cannot be cheap, but it can be accessed cheaply with less investment. Let's say second-hand clothing, for instance, bartering, exchanging. In the fashion community, there are many profiles of people. If you have a skill that you can exchange, you can acquire even a piece of clothing, a designer, a piece of clothing cheaper, but it's never going to be cheap. It has to be a fair exchange for a fair price for a well done job.
I also don't think that it should be a goal for it to be cheap. It needs to be accessible, of course, for everyone.
Yeah.
But what's really important is that indeed it is not exploiting both the planet and the people, I'd say. So there needs to be a true price that incorporates, both a living wage, but also what it costs the earth and transportation and everything that's involved. And I think that is the right price. That is the true price.
Now, wouldn't that be an interesting thing to actually look at the price on the price tag versus the real price if you had to build in the cost of the non-renewable resources that are allocated?
Yeah.
That would be a very interesting benchmark for really the real market value of an item. Getting back to the questions from the audience, because they're popping in here, I'm going to put a few into a package together. What is going to be the advantages of COVID-19 crisis in the fashion business? I don't just mean fashion shows, but in consumer habits or in business models. And will coronavirus force fashion into a sustainable future? Thoughts? Nothing
Can you repeat the first? Can you repeat the first?
The first question was, what is going to be the advantages of COVID-19 crisis in the fashion business? How to turn this negative into a positive? I do not just mean fashion shows, but in consumer habits or in business models. Do you think this moment is a pivotal moment in changing how we purchase, and a pivotal moment in terms of changing how we look at the whole question of consumption?
Well, I think what the COVID has done is actually has highlighted the stress points within the whole fashion system. So now we know where the leaks are, and now we know how to maybe patch up the holes. But I think that's the main benefit. Although I must say, what we also have noticed is when the demand drops drastically, what trickle-down effects it has on the global manufacturing system, and the humanitarian cost, the cost of lives in developing countries that were caused by the loss of jobs, if anything, reiterates this need of a gradual, considerate, gradual transition towards the less consumerist, more conscious consumerist society.
So I'm going to connect a question. Sorry, would you like to continue?
No. I was just going to come at it with it from a different perspective, that from a country like mine, that's more of a consumer type of country, right? With COVID-19, we saw the more reliance on people manufacturing and sourcing locally, during that season, which really, affected in a positive way, manufacturers, people were getting paid, there were jobs, in circulation, and that's pretty much because borders were closed. But fast forward like 2-3 months after, with the, lifts in border closures, the boom, the onslaught of dumping back into Nigeria started all over again. So in a way, we wish it's something that would last, in a way that can impact our manufacturing supply chain, our local manufacturing supply chain, to empower more people, keep them in jobs, and of course, to ensure that the distribution of raw materials, people who benefit from that chain can benefit a bit more. It helped us with reducing like carbon footprint. There was quite a lot of dependence on importation of textiles, fabric, trimmings, and so much. And for the first time, everyone had to rely on what was locally available for quite a period of time. And I think, vertical integration is the future. I hope that, you can't hope that there's COVID-19 all the time, but I'm hoping that in some way, shape, or form, this can be the foundation of things to come for many people in different parts of the world.
Anna, I want to loop you in, because you mentioned in your bio regenerative farming, and also Petra brought up the question of in Slovenia, that the lady who donated some land in relation to making raw materials available for the straw hat producer. Do we see that as being maybe that if we could use the internet as a way of maybe sourcing local materials, if we could create some type of platform economy model around the sourcing of local materials, that we might need to rely less on the typical supply chain methodologies?
Yeah, definitely. Here in the US, there's an organization, Fibershed, that does this. So the framework that they create is looking at localized supply chains, and then other people come in and create that same framework within their local regions within the US. So we were able to do that not local to the East Coast, but to the West Coast of our country. And we were able to work with a regenerative farmer, a 5th-generation farmer, and use his wool, which the farm was sequestering carbon. And then we were able to actually, due to, as we're talking about kind of this localized supply chain, due to the pandemic, we were able to actually knit those garments here in the US. So we actually built this local supply chain through this. So I fully agree that there are a lot of positive things that have come out of this. And one of them being, for us, working with this climate beneficial wool, but then also that localized supply chain.
And what does that do to the price of for the end consumer? How does that affect production volumes and the end consumer price?
Well, through this pandemic, we're also kind of shifting our business model, which I think we'll see a lot of brands doing this. So traditionally, we followed this wholesale business model. We were about 70% wholesale, so we relied very heavy on our retail partners. What we realized is that, yes, there's a price point that we want to be hitting as a brand, and it's very challenging to get that when you have, somebody else selling your product. So we will be launching these sweaters only on our website, and we'll be selling them, which then gives it at a more attractive retail point.
Brilliant. So direct to market. Do you, all of you, see any brands that are basically producing on-demand manufacturing? So in other words, you're taking, I think Petra, you mentioned it, that you could just the designer could put the design up, and then you could do, local manufacturing or production at home,
well,
production on demand.
That would be a possibility in a seasonless fashion calendar. When you're not based on season, but basically you introduce newness that kind of answers to your customer base demands, really, periodically. This is something that would be possible, yes, if you don't have these massive manufacturing periods twice a year. 4 times a year, 3 times. Now it's like, it's every few months. So.
I mean, just to touch up, to add to that a little bit, what we had to do this season, because in addition to the pandemic and the effect it's had on our creative design community, what we had to do was collaborate with a platform like Moda Operandi. And what it does is the designers, all you have to do is produce your samples, right? And then you're on their platform, you only produce what people buy, because we had to sort of innovate around ideas on how do we get the designers not spending too much, but at the same time producing only exactly what's needed. Yes, and we're also working with some blockchain technology providers, La Blacko, to sort of onboard our designers on their website, and create like 3D models. Everything is just targeted at trying to ensure that they don't have as much inventory, even though we are lucky to a large extent, because most of the brands that we work with are direct to customer as opposed to business to business. So I know what you mean, Dana, by saying that, it's really, really very important so that you don't have stock inventory issues, you don't have waste, and
Then you have to have also very sympathetic manufacturing partners. Which is a case there to have a more dispersed micro manufacturing available. And a lot of designers, to be honest, when they start, they are designers makers, so they make themselves, and then they slowly build like a network of manufacturing partners that they can switch on and switch off depending on really the manufacturing needs.
To be honest, I'm actually quite worried post-pandemic that we won't maybe see the changes in the industry that we will be hoping to see. At the start of this, I was quite hopeful that we will transition because of this. And because of the way that this pandemic actually shows that the way we're doing it right now is just not maintainable and not acceptable. If there's anything that pandemic has done, is that shown that we just can't continue like this. And I was hoping people, both consumers and producers, would sort of see that and realize that and use this time to transition into indeed a more seasonless, timeless, slower sort of industry that has respect for people and our environment. But for me now, having been in it for like, what is it, probably 9 months, 10 months approximately, I'm starting to lose a little bit of that hope, to be honest, because it looks like, especially the bigger brands are just still not paying the workers of all the orders that were cancelled because of COVID. When you look at the Clean Clothes campaign and their movement to try and, get the bigger brands to still pay up for all of those orders, which means that lots of people, millions of people, have just not been paid for the work that they've been doing. And also when I look around me, I see that quite some citizens sort of still feel that they want to go back to the way it was, whereas the way it was the problem. So we need to sort of move into a new normal, in a way, which I'm really hoping people will want to accept and be part of, because we created this world the way that it is. It's a man-made industry, so we can also change it. But I sort of get the feeling that more and more people feel quite righteous to the low prices, the massive amount of clothes they can buy, and feel that they're entitled to it. Whereas I don't think any of us are entitled to this very exploitative and detrimental way the industry is now built. So I hope that we keep up sort of that vision that we need to change, and it will be better for all of us. But I'm sort of sensing that people just want to go back to the way it was as soon as possible and start flying a lot, and just having cheap flights and cheap clothes and like all of that. But that's part of the problem, I think.
Well, I think that we all probably come from a time in the past when we lived with let's say, more limited number of resources in our wardrobe and had a more kind of capsule approach. I certainly grew up in an Ireland where, fashion was definitely not something that a lot of money was spent on, and you didn't even have the availability. I think the mass production and the availability of, real-time production at volume had a massive transformative effect on fashion. We don't want to mention names, but High Street has been, creating a demand in its own right for the quick fix, throwaway fashion, and even in the media world, we always talk about price per wear, like invest in statement pieces, invest in capsule items, and look at how much you spend on a cappuccino a day, like compare that to the price of buying a proper, coat, not 20 cheap ones, but get one that is actually crafted, and think about these things as being eternal objects rather than throwaway chic. But I think we've all kind of fallen into the trap of wanting to look for less. I mean, there's the typical terminology there that has also driven people towards this. But I mean, getting back to Marieke, what you said is very, very important. I believe that, while clothes have always been, or fashion has always been a tool to illustrate what we're about, what we represent, you really provoked me into thinking about this for young women. Like, is their confidence really for sale? I never really thought about it like that, because I always thought that fashion was an empowerment, that it was the right to basically look the way you want. If you want to be punk rock, if you do punk rock, whatever. But two thoughts came from this, and one was the kind of idea of confidence for sale on one side, and then the other one was about cultural appropriation. I think that you mentioned it in terms of the use of traditional symbols by mass market fashion brands and the inappropriateness of this. So maybe we could speak about that for a few minutes, because we still have 11 minutes to go.
I can speak about the first topic for sure. The cultural appropriation wasn't me. That was.
I know.
Oh, I know. Sorry. I couldn't see who you were looking at, just to make sure.
I can see everybody, so sorry. I know it's very, very distorting, so excuse me.
And I also don't want to appropriate someone else's amazing thoughts. So that's why I thought it would be important to point that out. In terms of the confidence and being able to just look the way you want, the reason I was bringing that up, and also that I've been diving into it, is because I was just so interested to see why we find it hard to make more ethical and more conscious choices. And because there's so much information available, and there's so many more options now than there was, for instance, 20 years ago. Whereas I also, just as a small sidestep, I'll definitely come back to this very quickly, I want to really reiterate the fact that we shouldn't look at this from an elitist point of view, that if you want to spend something on a crafted piece, you do need to have the disposable income to be able to save up for it. Also, you need to fall into quite an ideal image in terms of sizing for there to be other options for you. There's just not a wealth of choices in terms of, you know, pricing and sizing and looks and availability for everyone yet. So I think it's quite important to, I wouldn't want to shame anyone who's not doing it when it's not available for them. Luckily, of course, there's also, indeed, it was said before, secondhand and sharing and all of that. But in terms of buying sustainable fashion, that's not always possible for everyone yet, which is why we need to really strengthen this industry, I think, into making it much more inclusive and even bigger than it is.
Funnily enough, on the subject of inclusivity, one of our audience has written, don't you have the impression that responsible fashion is almost exclusively interested in women? Is it? It is not that, it's not that it's bad, but aren't men interested in it too?
Yeah, so I get lots of questions from men. I get lots of questions in general, but also from men, absolutely. And it is true that there are not that many brands who focus on men as much. I always get told it's because they buy less, which makes it harder for brands to really sustain that. But I very much agree that it needs to be for men. It needs to be for regular sizes, for true sizes, and it needs to incorporate, in terms of images and sizing, everyone, and not just the very ideal image. And I think that also really goes back to the point that you made about people being, you know, free to just be whoever they want and dress, you know, the way they want, which I just in general, when you look at the messaging by the fashion industry as a whole, is not the message they give. It's a very limited and very, a very encapsulated ideal of being in generally very young, still quite white, although things are changing, not necessarily when you look at the entire board, also very, let's say cisgender. It's very limited, and it really shows you that you need to be, you know, happy and polished and photoshopped and shiny, and, you know, making most of life, and you should not have any, you know, stretch marks or wrinkles or muffin tops, or, you know, it needs to be perfect, which of course it never is, and which is also why when you buy online, for instance, for me it's still so weird that there's not a lot more photographs of all the images and all the items on a different array of models. When I wear something and I'm 163 in terms of height, it will look very different on you, for instance, because you might be taller or shorter or wider, or, you know, there's so many ways in which an item can look very different, and we're all just disappointed and feel negative about ourselves all the time because of the messaging, the way that we are supposed to look, you know, very perfect. And when you get the clothes at home, they look very different on you because you don't look like the model, and you shouldn't have to.
Fair enough point. Thanks for the comments. I normally read those comments if I buy online, and normally I try to avoid it for the exact same reasons that you're referring to. Petra, you wanted to add something. I think I saw you put your hand.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly that. When you're buying, you are looking at these polished, quite generic models wearing these clothes, like the clothes horses, basically. One of the brands that I'm working with, a sustainable brand, Fanatic from London, she recognized that as being a barrier to get more diverse clientele to buy into quite narrow capsuled collection. And she started photographing her items on the model, but then also on the real people from different cultural background as well. So a dress with a jumper on top and a neck scarf, all of a sudden became what are they called? Muslim women type of, I do apologize, I forgot. The
headscarf.
Yeah, the headscarf. Well, it became culturally more varied, yeah. The presentation.
Hijab.
Yeah, hijab. Well, yeah, it's, I think there's a specific term that I forgot right now. She also plus size models, also dresses on men's, so transgender as well. So she has been she has used her creativity, not just to design, but also to bring her design closer to a more varied customer base.
I don't want to forget the question about cultural appropriation, but there are five questions here that I want to really cover, and maybe one of them has already been answered. So I'm just going to run through them super quick to keep our audience happy. Is there one brand you would recommend to us where you believe that they are doing everything right? Just name one if you have anybody that's even near to doing anything right. This is all shaking heads. What about you guys, Dana? You must be doing everything right, no? Over there in America, no?
There's no such thing. I think that that's the reality, is that if we, expect to sell this idea of sustainability, that we're doing all things right, then that's wrong. We need to be honest about there's so much more work to be done. And at the end of the day, we're still making clothes and we're still taking resources. Like, unless we were a business that was only selling, secondhand, which we're not. So yeah, I think there's many brands that are working towards making the right decisions for sure. But there's a lot of work to still be done.
So brilliant.
I think it's a process. I think it's a journey as well. So people need to be mindful of that, because it can be very daunting. You can ask yourself, oh my gosh, this is where I need to go and this is where I'm at. What do I do? Where do I start from? And we always tell people, just start,
Just start. I always think it's good to have a definition though. And I mean, like, a definition of what sustainable means that goods made with material that can be replenished at the rate of consumption. And I thought that was kind of a fair kind of statement. I don't even know where I got that. That might have been from one of your statements for you guys at some point. I don't know, but I just thought that was a brilliant kind of summary. Goods made with materials that can be replenished at the rate of consumption. It's a good start.
It's a start, but it excludes people though, and it needs to be about the workers as well.
I understand. Yes, and that's
right, absolutely. But I normally say, when people ask me this, made with respect for people and our environment. So I think it's really important to, but I'm sure you do too, to sort of incorporate all aspects of sustainability. So the fact that it's not about perfect. It's about, credible for me, that you're actually doing something that, is done in a credible way, and not just in a sort of window dressing, greenwashing kind of way. I think
is there an argument to say doing your best is good enough? Or
I probably wouldn't say that too quickly, because that sounds like you're done pretty quickly. I'd have to say you'd have to strive for the perfection.
But strive for perfection in the supply chain and strive for protection.
And I think we need to slide in the word accountability as well, because sometimes when you tell people it's at your own pace, I'm not quite sure, people and the environment are suffering. And, so I think we still there has to be some sort of measure of accountability with the process, and let people know that some aspect of it involves like a moral obligation. I think 2020 has, sort of taught all of us that there's got to be moral obligation to it. Like, think about it. I'm as mindful for you as you're as mindful of me. And if we, take that mindset with us, and all creatives take that mindset with them into the creative process, I guess we're going to have it's going to make quite a lot of impact. So, because it's a tricky one, because if you let people think, oh, it's at your own pace, then, my own pace can take me 30 years. Your pace might be 2 years, but my pace might be, So how do we create that sort of balance so people don't think, yes, do it at your pace, but there's accountability, there are moral obligations to it,
So maybe there should be some key performance indicators for this systems change that we need to actually implement here. But one or two more questions still, and very little time. The fashion world is coming to realize that operating a truly sustainable business goes far beyond raw materials and includes embracing diverse perspectives, thoughts. I think we've covered that extensively, but I did want to make a reference point to the person who shared the question. And while there are one or two more, I'm conscious of the fact we've got 1 minute and 30 seconds left, and I'd like to kind of give you all the opportunity to say one final thought. So whoever would like to begin with your final departing sentence to our audience, please.
I would just say, if we take care of the people, the workers, who are ultimately consumers as well, we take care of the environment as well.
Dana?
I believe a lot of it has been said, but I think that it comes down to the accountability, transparency, and to truly be thinking about what it is that we're putting out there in the world. And then on the consumer side, is it something that you really need, that you'll really wear and cherish, and whether you'll pass it on or continue to keep it in its life cycle?
Radio, last 40 seconds, ladies. I'll divide it between the two of you.
Okay, I'll go. I think for me, it's one thing I've been harping on over and over again is this attitude of consciousness around all of these conversations until it collectively becomes our way of being. Something that I imported from my friends at Future of Fashion. The future that we want to see, the future that we hope to see, is something that we all have to work towards collectively. And I think we will get there if we sort of visualize it, but there's got to be some sort of consciousness and not waiting for more and more. Okay, you go.
5 seconds, I reckon. I would absolutely say we made this world and this industry the way it is so we can also change it. So absolutely go for finding your role and finding where you can take the power and where you can make a change within, whether you're a student, whether you're an academic, whether you're in a production facilities, you can be part of this change and part of this fashion revolution. And
on that note, I'm going to cut because otherwise we'll all get. I'd say thank you very, very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.